Commission for September the 26th. Good to have each and every one of you here this morning. I'd like for each and every one in the audience, we want to welcome you. We'll now have the prayer and pledge to our allegiance. We'll ask Commissioner Trey Gooch to conduct that prayer and the pledge to the allegiance. Please stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's go to our Father in prayer. Oh, Father, we love you and we praise your name, for we know that all good comes from you. And Father, as we enjoy this beautiful fall day, may we take a moment to examine ourselves to ensure that not only are we doing the best that we can for our community, but the best that we can in the kingdom of God. Father, we ask that you bless Rutherford County, the great state of Tennessee, and the United States. And it's through Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. I pledge the flag of the United States of America and to
Thank you, Commissioner. Madam Chairman, we need to have a determination of our quorum. Could you please call the roll?
Jim Averwater. Jeff Phillips. Here. Mike Cush. Here. Lee Bogle. Here. Charlotte P. Here. Trey Gooch. Here. David Jones. Here. Chip Pinion. Marvin Whitworth. Here. Pettis Reed.
Here.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. It's good to see each one of you here. We now need to approve our minutes from September the 12th. I'll call on our Vice Chairman, Lee Bogle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have reviewed those minutes of the September 12th meeting and found those to be in good order, and therefore I make a motion to approve.
A motion to approve. Do I have a second? Second. Commissioner P. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes have been approved. Mr. DeMasi, do we have any items withdrawn or deferred?
No, sir.
No items withdrawn or deferred, so we'll move directly into our business, starting with... Okay, we'll move right into our business. We're starting with item 6, but we're going to have a little break in that action right now. We're going to do something. We want to recognize an individual that's been a part of this commission for, I'm not going to get into the number of years, but I tell you what, she helped train me, and I started in 2010. But she has been a vital part of the planning of Rutherford County. She was always someone that I took a lot of leading to her direction whenever she would get up to speak, whenever she would talk about different things, when she would bring a point of interest in. We became great friends on the Planning Commission as well as the County Commission in later years. I saw her abilities whenever she studied her lesson. She knew what she was talking about, and I think other commissioners would probably say the same thing. At this time, I'm going to ask that Rhonda Allen would come forward, and I'm going to ask that Mr. DeMasi, our director of our Planning Commission and our Planning Department, to come forward at this time if you would like to go to the well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity. As you very eloquently stated, Rhonda's been an integral part of the Planning Commission for quite a number of years. Actually, she started right before I did, as a matter of fact. So I've always been very appreciative of how she kept me on my toes over all these years, and just the input that she gave. It was always a great sounding board for ideas and different things. And we just wanted to take this moment just to present to you just a little token of our appreciation for all the years that you've put in on the Planning Commission. So.
I told Doug I would only come if he didn't make me cry, so I just want to tell you all, being on the Planning Commission was probably, I won't say probably, it was one of the greatest professional experiences of my life. Through the years, whenever anybody would talk about, how important the things were that we did on County Commission, I would tell them, You know, if you made me choose between Planning Commission and County Commission, I would choose Planning Commission every time. The land use decisions that we make are permanent. When a farm is developed, it's never going to be a farm again. And the decisions that you make in this room are very difficult because we know that when people bring something forward, you have to balance the property owner rights of the person who has the right to sell the farm because their kids aren't going to keep farming, and the neighbors who are going to be impacted by that. So it's not lost on me how important the decisions are that you have going forward. So I just really want to encourage you to keep the faith, you know, do really good work on the comprehensive plan that's coming up. We know how meaningful that is, and then the major thoroughfare plan, and you know, there's just a lot that goes into what you all do that people never see. And so I just want you to know how much I appreciate it, how much I appreciate this staff. They're the unsung heroes of this county. They're the ones who get the angry phone calls. You know, they're the ones who have to answer all of our millions of questions. And so I just want to say thank you to them and thank you to you all. This has probably been one of the best commissions that I've ever worked with. I've watched this group mature and become more sophisticated and professional through the years. And so I just want you to know how much I appreciate you and how honored I am to have been part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you for your dedication to Rutherford County. We'll move now into our business. Item 6, item A. This is for our preliminary plan approvals. Item A1, Rosewood Retreat, number 22-1012, 8 lots on 12.12 acres, zoned RM, located along West Gum Road. Monarch Homes, LLC, are the applicants. Mr. DeMasi.
Yes, sir, thank you. This piece of property we've actually seen in the past. There was a preliminary plan back in 2017 called Autumn Grove that was approved. Development never progressed, so ultimately the plan expired. This current applicant has submitted a different plan. Does not include any new streets as the original one did, but does show a detention-retention area on Lot 2, which is why it has to be a preliminary plan, because there's that common detention area. Our comments have been addressed. This plan is in good order. There is one label. They're going to be dedicating a little bit of right-of-way. They just needed to call that out a little better. The applicant's engineer is aware of that, and I don't see any reason to have any other comments on this. It's in good order. So with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners?
There we go.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Motion been made to approve. We have a second.
Second.
Second. Commissioner P. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Those who oppose? Rosewood Retreat has been approved. We'll now move into 6B. These are for final plat approvals. Item 1, Creeksbend Subdivision, Section 1, Phase 7, Reapproval, 21-2069, 35 lots on 17.05 acres, zoned RM, located along Garrett Street. Silver Hill Partners, LLC, are the applicants. Mr. DeMasi.
Yes, sir, thank you. The preliminary plat for this development was approved at the Planning Commission's July 10th, 2006 meeting. This final plat is consistent with that preliminary approval. The final plat was originally approved, the one that's before you now, was originally approved by the Planning Commission about a year ago, September 27th. They're not quite ready to record this yet, and final plat approvals by the Planning Commission are valid for 12 months unless they're recorded. So this is really just a reapproval. Nothing has changed on this. It's still in good order. They're just looking for a reapproval because their time is about to elapse. So again, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Commissioners? Motion approved. Do we have a second? Have a second. Commissioner Bogle, further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Creeksbend Subdivision has been approved. Final plat approval. Moving down now to B2. 9142 Horton Highway, 2063, 8 lots on 42.38 acres, zoned RL, located along Horton Highway. Scott and Rose Walter applicants, includes a fire hydrant water waiver. Mr. Demasi?
Yes, sir, thank you. The applicant's proposing to split a portion of this property into 8 acreage lots. Lots 3, 4, and 7 will all have frontage along Horton Highway, while lots 1, 2, 5, and 6, and 8 are going to be accessed using private access easements, which is allowed based on our regulations. CUD has provided a water will serve letter for this property. Domestic service can be provided, but fire protection in the form of hydrants cannot. Therefore, residential sprinkler systems will be required consistent with our regulations for the homes that are built as part of this development. Our comments have been addressed. Really, the only outstanding items had to deal with the fact that the fire hydrant cannot be supported. So they will have to add a certificate on the plat for the fire sprinkler systems. But other than that, this plat does appear to be in good order. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Discussion? Do I hear a motion?
Staff recommendation to approve.
Yes, sir, subject to the waiver.
Make a motion to approve, subject to staff comments.
Have a second?
Second.
Second. Commissioner Whitworth. Any further discussion? Mr. P.?
Demasi, the access to the back lots, where are the access to the back lots?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Where are the roads to get to the
There,
back lots?
you see Mike's highlighting the easements there on the screen. Those shaded area, or not shaded, but hatched areas. Yeah.
There'll be common driveways.
Yeah.
What'll that amount to, about 3 driveways onto Horton Highway? Is that what we're looking at?
4.
4, okay. Thank you.
No further discussion. All those in favor of the motion with staff comments, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion does pass. Item B3, Rucker Landing, Section 4, Phase 3, number 22664, 50 lots on 11.31 acres. It's zone PUD, located along Rucker Road. MH Way LLC is the applicant. Mr. Demasi.
Yes, sir, thank you. The preliminary plan for this development was approved by the Planning Commission back in September of 2020. Again, this plat is consistent with that preliminary approval. Our comments have been addressed. They have done everything we've asked them to do on this plat. It is in good order, and we'd recommend approval. Be happy to answer any questions.
Open for discussion. I have a motion on Rucker Landing.
So moved.
Motion made on Rucker Landing. Second. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Rucker Landing has been approved. Item B4, Walnut Grove Farms, Section 2, 222065, 43 lots on 20.66 acres, zoned RM, located along Walnut Grove Road. Walnut Grove Farms, LLC applicant. Mr. Demasi.
Yes, sir, thank you. The preliminary plan for this development was approved back in August of 2019 by the Planning Commission. Once again, this plat is consistent with that preliminary approval. I was just looking through our staff comments, and it's pretty much a blank sheet. So it looks like they have addressed the comments that we have. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Discussion? Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to approve with all staff comments.
Motion made with all staff comments. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Walnut Grove Farms has been approved. We'll now move into site plan approvals. 6C, Item 1, Believers Faith Fellowship Reapproval, number 19346, construction of a 12-square-foot community assembly building, associated parking, zoned RM, located off Church Street and Highway 269. Believers Faith Fellowship is the applicant. Mr. Demasi.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The Board of Zoning Appeals approved a special exception request for a church, which we consider a community assembly use, at their August 14th, 2019 meeting. A site plan based on that approval was submitted to the Planning Commission and also approved in August of 2019 by the Planning Commission. The site plan approvals, similar to what the plat we just considered a little bit ago, they actually have an approval time frame of 18 months and will expire if no building permits have been issued. No construction ever began as part of this project, so the applicant is just bringing this back through for reapproval. Again, nothing with the plan has changed. The plan's in good order. It's just a matter of the fact that it had expired. Its approval had lapsed. So with that, be happy to answer any questions.
Discussion.
I guess this is a stupid question, but they are fixing to move forward with this at this point.
Well, I would assume so, since they're bringing it forward. But, you know, I think they probably had the same intentions when they brought it forward the last time, but then, 2020 happened, and that kind of threw everything into a tailspin, so I'm guessing that had a lot to do with it.
Any further discussion? Have a motion?
Mr. Chair, if this is just a simple time lapse, I would make a motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve. Have a second. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Item C2, Generations Connect Daycare Facility, number 223021, construction of a 11,157 square foot daycare facility, zoned IN, located along County Farm Road. Rutherford County is the applicant. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think you're the chairman, Mr. Reed. You just said Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
I think you're the chairman.
When I do this one more time, this will make 3 times I've been up here, so go right ahead.
I'm like, I was excited. I just got a promotion. I'm like, all right, here we go.
Go ahead, Mr. Demasi.
Yes, thank you.
I just thought maybe you was getting tired of hearing your name.
The applicant's proposing to expand an existing daycare at this facility to accommodate county employees' children and others from the community if space does allow. This property is served with sanitary sewer from the city of Murfreesboro, so Murfreesboro Planning Commission approval will also be required for this. Most of our comments have been addressed, at least from a planning and zoning standpoint. I do believe Mike wanted to make a comment or two regarding the engineering of the property, so I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thank you, Douglas. The site plan itself is in fairly good order. I need to reach out to the design engineer, which I don't see him right now, but the proposed Generations building will be, if I can zoom in and my maps don't crash, will be in the kind of the northwest corner of the site. And there is, let me get a better view. In this area right here is where the proposed daycare will be. There's an existing daycare at this location with this red roof building. It's more or less a portable building that will be removed with this development. But one thing I wanted to address, whoops. There is a transformer, and they have added bollards to help protect the transformer. You can see it right here. It's pretty substantial. Right here, this is a large electrical transformer for the community care of Rutherford County, and I'll go to their site plan. They are proposing to add a few parking spots right here, and this is the transformer right here. I'm going to ask them, it's kind of a last-minute thing, I'd rather remove this parking spot here and maybe move it over in this location. I just worry that somebody, even with these bollards, could back into that transformer, backing out of this spot, and I might have them angle these diagonal parking spots a little bit more. But all in all, like I said, the plan is in good order. They're adding parking in other locations to help supplement the parking for the staff and the people coming to visit the daycare. But other than that, I think we're ready to go and in good order.
Questions, further discussion?
This is really exciting for the county to take this step. What's the maximum number of kids that we can do out there? How will that increase? Does anybody know?
Mr. Phillips, I'm not sure exactly what the capacity of that was proposed to be.
And it's also going to be eventually a 24-hour operation, is that correct?
That's my understanding from discussions that have been had, yes, sir.
Once again, this is much needed, especially for county employees who work second and third shifts, and I move to approve wholeheartedly with staff comments.
Have a second to the motion with staff comments. Further discussion? Yes, this is something that has come up through the commission and been discussed several times. All right, all those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Generations Connect Daycare Facility has been approved with staff comments. Item C3, Fleet Equipment, number 223022, construction of a 14,802 square foot office space, including guard shack and office bay, and 26,880 square foot service center on 41.34 acres, zone EAC, located along Miller Lane. Fleet Equipment is the applicant. Mr. DeMasi.
Yes, thank you. The applicant, as you stated, is proposing to construct a facility. It will be for trailer storage and repair. The site would include storage area for over-the-road trailers, part storage, repair facility for both trailers and rigs. It's more of an industrial, light industrial use, which is allowed in the EAC. The applicant estimates about 16 employees, 34 customer trips per day, and this would be a 24-hour facility. Most of our comments, at least from a planning and engineering planning and zoning standpoint, have been addressed. I know that there are some, there may be some outstanding engineering items if Mike wants to elaborate just a little more on those, but beyond that, the plan in and of itself appears to be in good order. So with that, we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Right. We've just got a few minor massaging that we need to do with the stormwater management ponds, and I'll show you the plan. So it's a fairly large site. This pond right here drains, this is Miller Road, if you can see that. We might need to adjust this pond to make it a little bit larger, so they might lose some parking, trailer parking spots here to make that work. Like I said, it's a large site. It's very flexible in what we can do, so I don't have any issues with making some adjustments to it before we do a pre-construction meeting.
I know the traffic in this area is challenging. How will this affect that in that area?
Well, this whole area, we have some good news. The state is partnering with the county to make some much-needed improvements to the interchange and to the ramps at Epps Mill, but also they're going to make some improvements with Epps Mill Road all the way from Manchester Highway to about 600 feet past Capitol Way. So this whole interchange will be improved. They'll be adding traffic signals at the ramps to kind of adjust the traffic flows. And this whole Epps Mill, I believe, will be made to a third turn lane. And one of the big problems hopefully will be addressed. There's a large power pole right at the corner of Forbes. It's right at the edge of the asphalt here. So we're hoping this big power pole with all these improvements will be moved away from this interchange. Trucks pulling out of Forbes rub up against that, so they'll swing wide to avoid that hitting that pole and force you can see where that truck is now in this turn lane. Typically, they will get in this through lane to make a left turn to avoid the trucks coming out. So that's a little bit more history than you needed, but this area is getting a much needed upgrade, and the state and the county have partnered together. The county has to put up, I believe, $6 million of a $46 million project. So it is moving forward. So yes, traffic in this area is a big concern, but we believe these improvements will help this area tremendously.
Mike, is there a timeline?
I haven't heard the official timeline.
Yeah, they've put this, the state at the MPO, this has been put on I think it's the next tip that's coming up. So I think by 2026 is when they want to start getting, and I'm sorry, the TIP, Transportation Improvement Plan. Those are projects that are fiscally constrained. They've got money associated with them. My understanding is this has been moved kind of toward the end of the next one, which would be about 2026. So a few years out still, but progress is going to start being made on it.
That pole, should that be part of the condition of this project, moving that pole?
No, sir. It'll be moved with that project. And this is for trailer storage. This is not a typical truck stop with trucks coming and going. So if a trucking company needs to lease trailers, this is where they'll get those trailers from. So it won't have the same traffic loads as a typical truck stop.
How about the increased pond? Should it be?
Yes, I'd make that subject to staff approval, all conditions. But other than that, the plan is in good order. They'll be on a conventional septic system. They'll have an office here that'll be connected to that, and there's another pond in this location, and it's I think sized adequately. We just need a little more time finessing this pond right here, and I believe we can do that with staff.
Other questions? If not, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve with all staff comments.
Motion been made with all staff comments. Do we have a second? Second. Mr. Gooch. Further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Those opposed? Fleet equipment has been approved. We'll now move into item 7, staff reports and other business. Mr. Damasi?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mike, could you pull up the PowerPoint? Yeah. Thank you. We, in conjunction with the Building Codes Department, we've talked with our water provider, CUD, about some of these things, and also our fire and rescue officials. We put together a little presentation on some issues, things that we'd like to discuss with you, kind of some proposed changes that we're talking about. And we just want to kind of run through this over the next few minutes. There's a lot of information here to digest. We don't expect any decisions to be made today. Really, what we're looking for is just an idea of maybe some direction on some of the things that we'd like to see happen, and maybe get some feedback from you all as well. So, go ahead. So what we'll do is we're going to talk about our current regulations and the subdivision regulations in our zoning code, as well as the fire code. We'll discuss some potential changes, and then we want to talk about a couple other topics that are related to the overall discussion being the RL density bonus and residential sprinkler systems. And then, again, questions for discussion we can throw out there, and then just have a little back and forth on a lot of these questions that we have. So go ahead, Mike. So our current regulations, when we look into subdivision regulations for fire infrastructure, they're required to meet the following criteria. We want to see water flow at least 500 gallons per minute, or GPM. The residual pressure of that is at least 20 pounds per square inch, or PSI. We currently require fire hydrant spacing of no greater than 1,000 feet to any property line. And again, now that's residential primarily. Commercial projects used to fall under that, but when we adopted fire codes, commercial projects defaulted. We changed our regulations at that time to default to the adopted fire code. Go ahead. And I'm going to turn this over to Josh Sanders. He's our fire marshal. He's going to talk about the next slide or two.
Thank you, Doug. So as Doug mentioned, we're looking to essentially clarify some information in our planning and zoning requirements to essentially make them more consistent with our current adopted code. So we adopted the 2018 International Fire Code as the county's fire code in 2019. Part of that adoption included the appendices that you see listed there. Appendix B, which handles the fire flow requirements for all buildings, as well as Appendix C. And to kind of back up and give a little background, so Doug mentioned the current requirements, specifically the 500 gallons per minute regarding fire flow, minimum fire flow requirements for the purposes of a hydrant. So just to give you some background on where that number came from, at the time before our enforcement of the fire code, that was a number provided by CUD as the minimum gallons per minute that they could actually support a fire hydrant. So that number not being based on adequate fire protection or adequate provision of fire protection water to any particular structure, it was a number just saying, hey, if we're going to put a fire hydrant here, we need to have 500 gallons per minute. So certainly an understandable measure at the time. Since the adoption of our fire code and my review of both the fire code that we have in my tenure as the fire marshal so far, and looking over the subdivision regulations, we recognize there being some differences. So what I'm bound to enforce through the fire code is what we'll see here, and the recommended potential changes to the subdivision regulations, as you'll see. The current fire code requires, in Appendix B, requires essentially 1,000 gallons per minute minimum for homes up to 3,600 square foot building envelope. That's a change that is directly reflected on basically what Appendix B looks at is that square footage of that building as it would relate to the type of construction for residential. Concurrently, there's also, when we look at commercial buildings or residential buildings above 3,600 square feet, again, it is related specifically to a square footage and type of construction. So again, essentially moving away from just a relatively arbitrary number of 500 gallons per minute to an actual fire flow that actually meets the demand for firefighting operations. That's where the Appendix B changes come in, and that's where we're trying to, again, as a housekeeping measure, more or less tie up the difference between what subdivision regulations say and what the fire code says. With regards to Appendix C, as you'll see there, which handles fire hydrant location and distribution, essentially what the fire code states is it brings a basically minimum spacing of 500 feet between each hydrant. Now, obviously, I think Doug will bring up some discussion on that. Our biggest goal from a fire rescue standpoint and a fire code standpoint is providing that spacing in areas of highest demand. So not necessarily looking to provide a 500 spacing in the middle of a rural area, but when we're looking at a major development that is going to be residentially dense, we obviously, that measure directly impacts the ability for our crews to adequately fight fire. So those are some of the conversations we'll have on that, I believe. all other commercial projects is really not impacted by this discussion. We're currently operating using Appendix B and C for commercial projects. They have, a lot of different, requirements to meet with regard to that. Is there anything else on the next slide? I couldn't remember. Okay. Doug, I can turn it back over to you, or I can keep talking either way.
I think that's good, Josh. Unless you just had other things to say, that's fine. This was just something we wanted to put up there. As far as the standards themselves from the 2018 Fire Code, it's the same standards that's used by those jurisdictions that you see on the screen. So we just wanted to put that up there just to say that this isn't something that is foreign to the area by any means. A lot of the jurisdictions around here are currently using the same parameters that the Fire Code dictates. So. Any other comments, Josh, for now?
I don't think there. Yeah, I think this it does a couple things. Like I said, kind of to sum up my end of it. This, as a housekeeping measure, brings what we're doing ahead of time in the planning process up to par with what the Fire Code what I'm bound to require under the Fire Code's provisions, and it really more or less brings us up to an even standing with the rest of the surrounding jurisdictions. I think it's important that we meet that, for lack of better terms, not give a whole lot of breaks in where we're looking at from a fire protection standpoint. I don't think that's something we want to skimp on too much.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
So some potential changes that we're considering based on this discussion, of course, is updating our county subdivision regulations and our zoning ordinance to reflect the standards used in the adopted Fire Code. Now, we would have to come up with an effective date on that. Tentatively, and again, that was just an idea that we had as we began discussing this, January 1st of this coming year, 2023. Now, that can be changed. Our idea is to give enough time to allow any existing projects that are coming through the pipeline to kind of make it through as far as new submittals that are coming in. But it would apply to any new complete preliminary plan, final plat, site plan, et cetera, plan development, rezoning submittal after whatever date we end up proposing. Of course, we'll coordinate that with consolidated utility as far as when to start using the new standards. What we want to avoid happening, which is kind of why we put the complete and in bold and underline there, we don't want to see a run of applications being submitted that really aren't complete, don't have all the required information that they're supposed to have, just so they can say, oh, hey, we got it in beforehand. You need to use those older regulations. So that's just, again, we'll have to kind of flesh that out as far as an effective date, but that's kind of some of the changes that we're proposing. Good. So before I open it up for discussion, just moving on to some of the other topics we wanted to discuss. One of them was being the RL, residential low density density bonus that we have currently in our zoning ordinance. As you all are aware, the county zoning ordinance does allow for increased residential density in the RL zone, provided they either have public sanitary sewer or a decentralized sewer system like a step system, or they can have adequate soils for septic systems as determined by TDEC. And they also have to have adequate water for both domestic and fire protection, which would be how we've always enforced this, is in the form of fire hydrants. If they meet those standards, they can either decrease, as you know, the RL requires a 1 unit per acre minimum. They can take that down to either 15,000 square feet if they're using a sewer or a step system, or 22,000 square feet if they have septic. Again, this is all provided that they have adequate water for the fire protection and also for domestic. If they don't have adequate fire protection in the form of hydrants, doesn't matter if they use a step or not, they've got the 1 unit per acre minimum. So that's what's currently in the ordinance. So go ahead. Thank you. So this is what I just said. If water service cannot be provided in the form of fire protection and hydrants, the minimum size in the RL zone is 1 acre. We feel that this is something that possibly removing this may allow the more rural areas of the county, especially that struggle with water availability, to stay more rural. And another reason we would like to see this possibly removed is the owner applicant could always ask for rezoning if they come to a piece of property and determine, hey, it's got everything that we need here for adequate fire protection and everything. We were going to request a rezoning. At that point, they would bring an application to you, and we would evaluate it based on our regulations, our comprehensive plan, and those things. Does our comprehensive plan recommend more urban densities in this area, or is it a more rural type density? Do we want to see that in that area? The reason, if you remember, we brought this up in the first place, the whole reason that wasn't even in the code is because of the fact that we knew there would be areas that possibly qualified for that. So we put that in there as kind of a low provision so they wouldn't have to go through the zoning. But, after seeing several of these developments go through in areas that maybe weren't as appropriate as we would have thought, we're thinking maybe it's time to do away with that. So go ahead. Another topic, and again, we're just kind of running through these real quick, and we'll be happy to talk about these in more detail. Regarding residential sprinkler systems, what our current regulations state is that fire hydrants cannot be supported in a development, and we saw one of those a little earlier today with Rosewood Retreat. The Planning Commission has to approve a waiver, which is what you did on that one, and then residential sprinkler systems have to be installed in developments with greater than 2 lots, which Rosewood Retreat, I'm sorry, it wasn't Rosewood Retreat, it was 9142 Horton Highway, excuse me, got that mixed up. This provision would not apply to divided tracts and does not apply to divided tracts greater than 5 acres because they aren't technically in a subdivision. Now, the reason it applied for Horton Highway is because they were accessing the private easement, which is considered the extension of utilities in the state code, which is considered a subdivision. But if somebody had 50 acres along a stretch of road and they just broke it into 5-acre tracts all the way up and down the road, that technically doesn't qualify as a subdivision. So the sprinkler system requirements that we're talking about really deal with subdivision lots. So go ahead. So some of the questions on that that we'd like to talk about too, in the sprinkler systems and everything. First of all, fire hydrant spacing in more rural areas of the county. Josh kind of alluded to this a little earlier. Do we change and keep the 500-foot spacing across the board, or do we adopt the 1,000-foot spacing for subdivisions of 5 lots or less? Do we look at the possibility of a more rural dimension like Josh was talking about in the more rural areas? We keep that at 1,000. We also are thinking about increasing that number requiring the sprinkler systems from greater than 2 to greater than 5. One of the reasons is that the will serve letters, CUD does not require a water will serve letter for any residential development with 5 lots or less. And also that goes along with the proposed administrative approval that we've been talking about, giving staff the ability to approve residential subdivisions with 5 lots or less. So that's just to kind of keep everything consistent. That was a possible change that we were thinking about. So with that, I think that's everything. Go ahead to the next slide, Mike. I think that's everything that we see there. Again, this is a lot of information to throw at you. Kind of curious to see what you all think. Kind of get some direction from you as to how you would like to move forward with some of these things. And we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have on this.
Floor is open for discussion. Not everybody at once now.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question about the International Fire Code. Has Appendix C been adopted by the county?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a copy of Appendix B and C in my planning binder. I think it's been here for like 4 or 5 years. And it does state exactly what Doug just mentioned. And I would be happy to follow the building or the fire code suggestion of 1,000 feet versus our 500 feet for hydrant spacing. There is one little note on that that basically says on a dead-end street, or you can drop that to 400 feet. And it also states that a maximum distance from any point on the street or road frontage to a hydrant is 250. I don't know that that ever is a problem or ever comes into play.
Not usually. I think where we run into those issues is if you had we see that more in commercial buildings where you have a larger offset.
Yeah. So I'm in favor of changing our current 500-foot policy. No, I'm sorry. Changing our
1,000.
1,000, yes, sir.
Yeah, 1,000. Yeah, go to the 1,000. Yeah.
Josh, what were you saying that the amount of fire hose is carried on a, I know we discussed that at one time.
Yes, sir. They carry, from a large diameter hose or a supply line standpoint, it's right at 1,000 feet. So even 1,000 foot, when you start factoring in the distance of the hydrant from the road, the distance from the apparatus to the hydrant, you know, you run out a lot of line really quick. So 500-foot spacing provides a great advantage to our crews.
Any other ideas, discussion? Doug, this could be quite a bit to digest maybe at one time. Could we have probably these slides emailed to
Oh, absolutely. Yes, sir. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
everyone?
I'll save it as a, right now it's a I can save it as a PDF, make it easier to distribute.
That'd help everyone if we had this to go over and look at a little bit more.
Yeah, and there'll be a timing element to a lot of this too. When it comes to sprinkler requirements, it's not just something we can put in our subdivision regulations. It's something that has to have a separate approval from the legislative body. We ran into that a few years ago. Well, I guess it's been about 10 years ago now, when we changed our subdivision regulations. We already had the sprinkler requirement there, but the law had changed in the interim time that said if you have a sprinkler requirement, your legislative body has to adopt it separately. Even though we were just taking it from one code, the older code, to the newer code, when we updated everything, that still applied. So again, there'll be a little bit of timing in here, and we'll have to flesh out some of the particulars. And I know that Jason from CUD, Josh, and myself have kind of been in a little bit of an email chain about some of the questions as far as the more rural areas and different things about how to define that. So those are things we'll want to flesh out before actually bringing anything forward. But yeah, we can definitely get you those slides and start working on more of the particulars behind how we want to implement this.
So Doug, is our sprinkler requirement more stringent than others? No, Mike says.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't,
Or said a better way, is our current sprinkler requirement in line with state standards, Josh?
Yeah, if I may. So what we're requiring from a fire sprinklering standpoint is really a bare minimum to look at. You have no other means of the fire department to get to your house and provide adequate fire protection water. So in lieu of that, a fire sprinkler system is kind of like our last resort to ensure that your family's safety and provide some minimum level of property protection. So far as, looking around there, we have jurisdictions that are a 0 square footage requirement for residential fire sprinklers. There's jurisdictions that have no regulations. So I feel that where we're at with our fire sprinkler regulations is very reasonable. There's arguments on both sides that say, more is better, less is better. But I think for what we have, it's very reasonable and very pragmatic to say, well, if you don't have any other means of fire protection, this is what we're looking at.
Commissioner?
This may come across as a stupid question, but on the residential sprinklers, what would cause the sprinklers to activate?
Certainly, no, that's a great question because it's a highly misunderstood process. So in a residential sprinkler system, just as it would be in a commercial sprinkler system, the system only activates when heat is applied to the sprinkler head. And that sprinkler head contains, typically these days, it's what's called a frangible bulb. It's a glass bulb that holds back a stopper at the orifice of the fire sprinkler where the tubing comes down and basically holds back the water. So there's water in the lines at all times. That bulb contains a fluid that is, for lack of better terms, heat sensitive and will expand at a certain temperature. So when that certain level of heat, whatever that head is rated for, when that heat reaches that sprinkler head, and it's not like, on a hot day it's going to activate. It is fire specific. When that heat reaches that sprinkler head, the bulb is fractured, allows the stopper to come through, and now we have water discharging from a single head, and that's it at that time. So in order for additional heads to activate, that heat would then have to reach another adjacent head. And in the residential sprinkler systems, you don't see the head spacing as consistently as you would in commercial. Usually it's a little more spread out. And so typically on a residential sprinkler application, a single head is designed, in the most often case, a single head's going to probably take care of it, at least hold it to a point before the fire department gets there to fully extinguish. But you're not, a lot of times in Hollywood, you see, somebody pulls a pull station and the sprinklers go off. That's not possible. Or even one sprinkler head, holds up lighter to a sprinkler head and the whole system goes off. So it's each head has to be activated by heat and directly applied to that head. So. No, sir. So those systems are separate but connected in many cases. So when smoke is generated, that system is usually handled by a fire alarm system of some type. So a smoke detector, same the way that a smoke alarm works in a residence, it detects the smoke and then sends a signal back to the alarm saying, hey, we've got a smoke signal. So even in a commercial setting where we have concurrent fire alarm systems and fire sprinkler systems in one building, the activation of, say, like I said, a pull station, a smoke detector will not set off the fire sprinkler system. However, the activation of the fire sprinkler system will set off the alarm system. So it allows for that fire department notification to happen in the instance of a sprinkler activation. But yes or no, those, again, from a sprinkler system standpoint, it's simply the heat that has to be applied directly to that sprinkler head. Not likely, unless those beans catch fire and burns up the side of your cabinets. You're probably all right.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Josh, if you don't mind, is there any way for a resident, a homeowner, to bypass that system?
And that is something that that I'm in the process of looking at more diligently as far as the installation of residential fire sprinkler systems. Depends on how it's set up. A lot of times the installer can install a main control valve. A lot of jurisdictions have tied that into just the domestic water source, so it can't be turned off unless you turn off the main domestic water, because there are a lot of misconceptions with the use of residential fire sprinkler systems. And if smoke gets in my house or something like that, then the whole system's going to go off and I'm going to flood my house, which doesn't happen. But it depends on how it gets set up, and that's fortunately where in my position I'm looking at when we have these systems installed, that I'm going to be going out and inspecting those and looking at more defined ways to make sure that they just can't be shut off arbitrarily so we lose that fire protection. If that answers your question.
Just one more quick question. Do we know the added cost to add a sprinkler system to, say, a 2,000 square foot home?
At one point, it was on new. It was roughly $2 to $3 per square foot. The last I heard, I haven't heard any updated numbers, so I'm not 100%, but I can certainly find out.
Mr. Chairman, does anybody know whether the insurance on a home with sprinkler systems is more or less than one without it?
Well, off the top of my head, no. I know that a lot of insurance companies will give breaks for various alarm systems and things like that. I would think something like that would fall into a similar category, but without knowing for sure, I guess I would hate to speculate, even though I just did. But
Other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mike's got our zoning map on the screen. When we were talking about the RL density bonus, what we're looking at are those areas in yellow, kind of on the outskirts of the county. Now you can kind of see in the upper left where Smyrna is located. It's kind of a yellowish color. It looks like a lighter yellow. It doesn't apply to that, obviously, because that's in the town of Smyrna. But anything outside of the municipalities that you see in yellow on that map, that's where the RL density bonus does apply. So again, if we were to take that out, I mean, obviously they can still develop under the densities that they have, but they would have to, if they wanted more density at that point, instead of getting it by right in the ordinance, they would have to ask for a rezoning. So this gives you an idea of the area we're looking at.
Doug, if I'm not mistaken, it looks like the outer ring that we discussed 10, 12 years ago as far as the comprehensive plan at that time, and that's what we're talking about.
Yes, sir. And actually, and you're absolutely right. The orange, the orangish area, that was considered part of the urban, either the general urban area or the suburban belt. The RL area we identified based on what was identified in the plan as the more rural area. So that's how those boundaries came about in the first place.
So the lighter color on the outside represents that outer ring where we would recommend larger lots.
Correct. The 1 acre minimum under the RL.
Correct. And then recommended more high density would be that middle ring.
Correct. And I may have neglected to say this during the presentation, but when we talk about additional density, what we're talking about is going from 1 unit an acre to 3 units an acre, which is what's allowed in the RM district. So I may have neglected to say that. I apologize. So it's not like they're getting, 5 to 10 units an acre. It's up to 3, but again, more density in the more rural areas.
Just one quick follow-up to the fire hydrant versus sprinkler system. What the recommendation is or the discussion is about moving it from 2 lots up to 5 lots. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to justify it in my mind.
Well, yes, and that is,
if you've got 5 lots.
Right, that's less restrictive than what we would do now. I think the idea, and Josh can certainly chime in here, we had a couple of thoughts when we were thinking about that. Again, most of our concerns being are the more dense developments, the larger subdivisions, but also just trying to be consistent with if 5 lots is kind of the cutoff for what we're going to be allowed to approve administratively, it's going to be the cutoff for what CUD doesn't require will serve letters. We thought, well, why don't we just keep everything at 5 lots? That way it's consistent across the board for all of our different regulations. That was kind of our thought process as we were going through that.
I don't disagree with that, but logically it makes sense that if you've got more lots to develop, it's more justification for a fire hydrant in my mind. And right. I'll lean in that direction versus sprinkler.
Right, and when we first started looking at the whole sprinkler requirement, it was never, at least the discussion that we had here at the Planning Commission, it was never a discussion as to the fire sprinklers were just going to replace the fire hydrants. If we didn't want developers coming in and say, well, yeah, we can put fire hydrants out here, but we'd rather do sprinkler systems because we don't have to worry about putting in the hydrants. That's more on the builders because they're the ones that are putting in the sprinkler systems and everything on that side of things. So we were very clear when we went about this originally that it was never an either-or situation. This just gave a little bit of a leeway to those properties that couldn't support the fire hydrant. It still gave them a little bit of developability of the property using the sprinklers, but it was never meant to be a replacement for the hydrants.
Other questions? We'll get that to you, and so you can take a look at it, sort of digest it, and see where we go from there. I believe we have tiny home regulations?
Yes, sir. Just a couple more updates. Mike, if you could bring up. Yeah. Look under. Yes. No, that's the other one. There you go. Excuse me. We had a presentation about a month or so ago regarding tiny houses and how we may start allowing those in the unincorporated area. We went through the presentation. Overall, I'd say, generally speaking, the discussion was favorable to crafting some regulations to that effect. So what we've done is we come up with our first stab, if you will, of what we're proposing. The first would be, of course, defining what they are. A tiny house, there's a couple different definitions here, as you see, for tiny homes. One of them is a site-built dwelling that is 400 square feet or less in the floor area excluding lofts. It's regulated by the applicable appendix of the currently adopted International Residential Code. I'll let Tanya discuss that in more detail if you've got questions for her. The second kind would be a manufactured tiny home, which is a pre-assembled permanent dwelling measuring 400 square feet or less. Again, it's not site-built. It's a modular home and regulated under the Tennessee Modular Building Act, and displays a decal verified by the State Fire Marshal's Office. It does not include, however, what we would call ready removables, which is that third definition. We don't have a definition for that currently, but this means basically a ready removable would be any kind of like a Dutch barn, something like that you'd buy at Lowe's or Home Depot, one of those places. I won't read the definition word for word, but that's what that really is discussing. So we would propose adding those definitions into our zoning ordinance. Appendix B is our land use activity table. We would update that to add a category for dwelling, tiny house / manufactured tiny home. If it's greater than 5 acres, we would allow it by right. If it's less than 5 acres, it would require a special exception in the RL and the RM districts. That's similar to how we handle mobile homes now, particularly single wides. Double wides are considered stick-built homes, so it doesn't apply to that. We'd also add some use-specific standards in Chapter 11 for both tiny homes and the manufactured tiny homes. Again, you can kind of see what those regulations look like right there. And we would also allow them as ADUs, again, similar to what we would require for any kind of a manufactured home or a mobile home on the property. Right now, if it's a mobile home, it automatically has to get a special exception if it's an accessory dwelling unit, like a mother-in-law apartment or something like that. So that's kind of the direction we would like to go. We haven't discussed I know there was some discussion when we had this presentation last month regarding tiny home communities and things like that. We haven't quite made it that far with it. We wanted to get something here on the books and then start working in that direction. Right now we would just treat it as a planned development, more than likely. But that's kind of the direction we were wanting to go with this. And so, again, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding that. And if you've got more specific questions about building code and fire code issues, we have Josh and Tanya here as well.
Discussion? Questions?
The 400 square feet, where does that, why 400 square feet? What happens if it's 450?
If it's 450 square feet, it would be regulated by the regular International Residential Code. It would be treated like a single-family dwelling.
Yeah.
And the 400 square feet is defined in Appendix Q as a tiny home in the International Code.
Doug, you may have said this, but maybe I didn't catch it. If you had a tiny home development, such as a trailer park, that kind of thing, are they regulated differently than a trailer park would be regulated?
Well, right now, we would probably consider it more of a planned development because the manufactured communities, manufactured home community regulations we have now, mobile home park communities that we have regulations for now, really don't envision tiny homes. Now, it could be just as simple as updating what's in Chapter 4 of our zoning ordinance to include tiny homes as a possibility. But to answer your question, we would have to have that as a planned development application. I don't think it would qualify right now under the mobile home community regulations that we have.
I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've seen a mobile home development in Rosewood
Well,
County.
actually, not to cut you off, but I've worked here for 16 years. We've never seen one, a new one anyway. And now we've had some conversations with people in the past that are looking in that direction, but nothing's ever come forward. But the regulations we currently have in our zoning ordinance for mobile home parks, which we actually have a specific zoning for that, MHP for mobile home park, no one's ever requested it. So it's kind of hard to say how similar the regs are, other than to say tiny homes weren't envisioned when we first created all that. So.
I have seen pictures of these, where people talk about these and where they're going and whatever. I think this industry is something now that's coming on the market, what's going there. It used to make, I remember our first home, people would come over and see our house that my wife worked so hard on, and they'd always say, "How cute," and that would make her so mad because she said, "They're telling us we got a little bitty house." I said, "That's what cute means." And I said, so now when I see this, I think about that house, that it was so cute. And that's what these, not going to be tiny homes, they're going to be cute homes. And where we go from there. But I just sitting there thinking, hey, a 400 up in my pond would be really nice. I wouldn't even want electricity to do it. Where I can go and hide. Be a great place. But I think we might see some of those. Mm-hmm. It comes that way.
But if this passes, Prattis, you can put it out there because we can put us out one if we need to.
I think I'm beyond the 5 acres, I think, I could put it there.
So if I get kicked out, Doug, let me put a house up now.
Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Doug, help me understand. You've done a great job on the definition and the use-specific standards. So let me just get in my head where you're thinking and where you're going. I certainly understand like a tiny house community. You know, if somebody wanted to come in with several acres and build a dozen or more of these as a community. And I think what I'm reading here is if you have 5 acres or more, you could put one.
Correct.
Just one?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, now that's a good question. Let me throw this out there. But for properties that have 15 acres or larger, we do allow for 2 principal dwellings on the property. So I guess in theory, you could say they could have 2, but but generally what you're saying is correct.
Okay. So if I have 5 acres or more, I could put one of these, no questions asked. I could use it for a rental. I could use it for my mother. I could do whatever I wanted to do.
Yeah, if it was on 5 acres of land and it met these standards, and it was, again, it wasn't accessory to anything, it wasn't an ADU, it was a principal structure, and yeah, I don't think we couldn't regulate whether or not somebody rented it or not.
Okay, okay. But what we're not saying, or what we're not allowing, I don't think we're saying it in here specifically in black and white, but our intentions are not to say that if you are in a county subdivision, you cannot put one of these in your backyard, whether you have 4.5 acres or less, you cannot do this.
Well, what it is saying, of course, I'm going to assume that you're talking about a piece of property less than 5 acres that has a house on it already.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to use it as an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU, that's kind of, we put that in there, that it would require a special exception.
Special exception, right.
Right, like, because,
right.
well, yeah, and actually, yeah, because that's how we would handle mobile homes too. It's the same. We do the same thing with single wide mobile homes if somebody wants to do. It's a special exception regardless of how big the property is at that point.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I just envision that people in a subdivision in the county may think, oh wow, I'm going to put my mom in here or my granddad in here and call it good, but they can't do that.
Yeah, not without going through the special exception, right? Now, of course, I'll throw this out there, even though we wouldn't have any part of enforcing those, obviously subdivision are going to have their own private restrictions and covenants. They may say, no mobile structure, no tiny, whatever, obviously, again, we can't enforce that, but we always instruct applicants, look, if you're looking to do something like this, make sure that, you're on the up and up with your HOA or any restrictions,
Okay. So as you expand this writing, the next step would be a legit tiny home community.
Right. And kind of the way that I kind of see this going forward, I mean, there's a couple of different ways. First of all, getting some regulations just on the books for tiny homes in general. We get a lot of phone calls in our office, and I'm sure Tanya does in hers as well, as far as people wanting to use these as, short-term rentals, Airbnbs, whatever, VRBOs. I think what the next step would be is get something on the books and then start tackling how we want to handle short-term rentals, because that's becoming more and more of an issue. And then eventually that, I think, evolves into how do we handle the larger communities of tiny homes if they'll start coming up more frequently. We hadn't really had any discussion of anybody wanting to use property as a tiny home community. I'll say we probably have received a call or two about it. Most of the calls we get really deal with using tiny homes just in general and then using them as short-term rentals.
So the short-term rentals have not been addressed yet?
That's correct.
That is coming?
Yes, I think that's kind of the next evolution of this. After we get this part situated, then start working on that direction, working in that direction. And again, this is just for discussion. Even if we move this forward, this has to be approved by both the, recommended by the Planning Commission and approved by the County Commission, because this is a change to the zoning ordinance. So this would have to go through the zoning process.
But those regulations are coming. That's my question. I mean, that's what I foresee happening, is somebody with 20 acres or 10 acres, 15 acres going up and, a tiny home and then renting them out, and they're having, different people come in every weekend, and 5 acres is enough for them to have a little party, and disturb the neighborhood.
Right, and obviously I'm not naive to sit here and say that it's not happening now. I'm sure it is. We're just maybe not getting the complaints about it. But it'd be nice to have some regulations to fall back on if we do get into that situation, because we're not just looking at just the structure. Of course, we're also looking at how they're handling septic. That was one of the things with this that we were really looking at. Okay, we want these on permanent septic systems and things, not like a pump and haul type situation where, oh, it's got a tank in the back, yeah, we're good. Like, no, if you want to use this as a living unit, it's going to have to be built as that, with all the the infrastructure that goes along with that.
I think mostly HOA bylaws would probably cover most of those restrictions and probably wouldn't allow those type of things to be put in as it relates to rental units, those type of things. But, we just approved, a 4-lot subdivision a little bit earlier with a little bit larger lots. And those would be my concerns, is that people will move in there and they have plenty of room. So I'm going to put in a tiny home, rent the property out, those type of things. I think that's what we, at least this commissioner, would like to restrict from happening. And I think that's probably the direction we're going in ultimately at some point in time. But we have some control as it relates to HOA bylaws, especially when it comes to sanitary sewage and water, those kind of things that have to be in their bylaws, correct?
Well, we don't really tell the developers what they have to put in their bylaws as far as HOAs go. Now, sometimes with planned developments, there are things that we put in there that, there are various conditions and things that we would expect to see in their bylaws. But if somebody just comes in, like that development earlier that you were referring to on Horton Highway, they need to have something at least for maintenance of the easements that they're looking at, those private easements. But beyond that, there's nothing else we would require them to put in there.
There's no requirement outside of a PUD for sanitary sewage that has to be in those bylaws?
Well,
somebody has to take care of it, right?
Yeah, I think that's handled a lot through the building code and any of the state codes and things. Tanny, if you want to speak more on it. Yeah.
It would have to be connected to a permanent sewage system.
Say that again?
It would have to be connected to a permanent sewage system that's been approved by TDEC or a STEP system.
But we require it to be in their HOA bylaws, right?
Not that I know of.
No, I mean, that goes without saying. Even if it wasn't in the bylaws, they still have to have a septic system for their houses on the property. That's just part of the regular building code and what TDEC would require. So it doesn't really have to be in the bylaws.
So long-term maintenance of that falls on who?
Long-term maintenance of the system. Of the system for the sewer. I mean, it would just be the private property owner. Are you talking just an individual system, or are you talking like a larger step system?
What I'm talking about is not a PUD, just a regular development that's there that is on a step system.
Yes.
Somehow, some way, there has to be a requirement that somebody's responsible that forever. And isn't it one of our requirements that it's put in the HOA bylaws that the HOA is responsible for the long-term maintenance of that step system? Is that not correct?
I believe the maintenance for step systems falls to CUD. Because they own and maintain the systems. Now, Jason's here. I'm not sure about the individual tanks, if that's part of everything or not, but he's nodding his head yes. But yeah, CUD owns and maintains those systems. Yeah.
Good, but somebody's responsible for that, and usually
Yes.
it's in the HOA bylaws.
Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily in HOA bylaws, but even though it's not, CUD is still responsible for the step system. So yeah, there is a maintenance, there is somebody maintaining those.
More discussion, or where do we need to go?
What would you like from us, Doug?
Well, I guess just if you like how this is, then we can go ahead and get this on the schedule for a public hearing to make the changes to the zoning ordinance. Now, I don't know if that'll be this coming month in October or maybe the next month. And the only reason I say that is as of right now, we've got 7 rezoning cases for next month's night meeting. So I don't foresee this being controversial. Most of the cases I don't necessarily see being controversial on the next agenda, although there are a couple on there that have the potential to be that way, but most of them seem pretty straightforward. But I'll leave that to your discretion, how you would like to move forward with this.
Just to clarify on the definitions, manufactured tiny homes regulated under Tennessee Modular Buildings Act. The previous statement about tiny house, site-built dwelling, and then it references adopted International Residential Code. Does that definition allow for custom builds of these? Is that, I'm kind of thinking of it in 2 categories too. When you reference code, that most of the ones that people are watching on TV have been custom built one-off, and just want to make sure that we're covering that as well, that they're covered under the applicable codes. And that's what I'm reading there. Is that fair to say?
Most of them are custom. They are custom, as long as they meet the criteria in Appendix Q of the International Residential Code. They can customize them to their heart's content,
Okay.
as long as they meet the code.
Okay, and then when it had the statement about the Tennessee Modular Buildings Act, I'm thinking about the manufactured homes that may be manufactured in a more traditional setting, same footprint, same development. So I just want to make sure we're covering both on those, and that's what it sounded like.
Right. So the State Fire Marshal's Office has 2 programs, one for manufactured homes and one for modular homes. The manufactured homes that are manufactured and fabricated in a factory are regulated by HUD. So they have to meet HUD regulations. The modular homes are different. They're constructed and inspected by a certified inspector that's certified through the State Fire Marshal's Office. They are regulated closer to the residential code than the HUD regulations.
Thank you. I knew that was a lot of acts and things going on there. I want to make sure we were covering both aspects of that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick recommendation. We're studying the fire protection regulations, and it'll come back. So what if we waited a month and did both of those maybe at the same time in November? That would give us time to study all of these things, and it could be put on the November public hearing 6 o'clock meeting. So that would give us at least 2 more meetings to.
Yeah, that works for us. That's perfectly fine.
That way you'll have a copy of it to look at, go that way. Does that seem to work for everyone? So we'll put it on the November 6 o'clock meeting then. I think that requires a motion or whatever.
I don't think so,
Make
no,
that
sir.
planning among ourselves. Okay, sir.
One other item I did want to bring to your attention, this has to do with mini warehouses. This is a situation that it came up with a specific development up on East Jefferson Pike, which is actually one of the zoning cases you'll see coming before us next month. These are the standards for mini warehouses. In particular, I want to talk about item G. The maximum size of an individual storage unit shall be 500 square feet. These regulations were created when we adopted our new zoning ordinance, or our current zoning ordinance, I should say, back in 2012, which became effective January 1st of 2013. We had an individual that was trying to get a variance to this provision before the Board of Zoning Appeals to have a little bit larger of a storage unit. So this isn't the actual size of the entire building. You know, you could have a 10,000 square foot building. What we were saying is the individual booths in there, if you will, would have to be no greater than 500 square feet. So each individual unit could be no bigger than that. When these regulations were created, I don't think it anticipated what we've been seeing recently, and a lot of that is people that want to store like boats and RVs and everything into these units, and some of these RVs and boats can get fairly large. We did a little bit of research on that, and I thank my staff for putting that together. Like a Class A motorhome can run anywhere from about 25 feet in length all the way up to nearly 45 feet. The average width of that same Class A RV is about 100 inches, which is 8 feet 4 inches in width. It says the range of measurements is quite small, ranging anywhere from 95 to about 101. However, most land in the height, they all land somewhere between 10 and 11 feet. So when you add up all of that to see how much clearance you need, 500 square feet just doesn't do it. You need about 750 square feet. So what we're thinking about is just making a amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow for, instead of a maximum of 500 feet, to a maximum of 750. The reason that maximum is in there, we didn't want somebody coming in saying it's a mini warehouse, and then they just basically clear out all the walls, and next thing you know, they've got like a 10 or 20,000 square foot warehouse facility, which is a different zoning classification entirely. So that's the reason for the maximum that's in there. But staff is supportive of bumping that up to 750, and I think that would, especially with the things that we've been seeing lately with this trend of RV and boat parking facilities and things like that, we think that would be an appropriate change. So we just wanted to bring that to your attention.
You might want to store your tiny home in there, too.
Just me, I think. I think that's an excellent idea, and it would be able to fit a tiny home in there, so I'd recommend that we approve.
Well, again, this would have to go, and I appreciate the nod of confidence, but this would have to be approved through the Planning Commission through a public hearing and then through the Board of Commissioners as a zoning change.
Add it to November.
Within November
Very good.
also.
Well, we can do that in November as well.
My notebook's getting full. All right, we'll move that into November as well. With a mini warehouse as well. We've done everything tiny and mini. I feel like I need to go home and watch the Smurfs. So, all right, this concludes the agenda. We have other business.
One item I did want to bring up, just the remaining meetings we have for this year. Of course, October is the last month that we have 2 Planning Commission meetings. We'll have one on the 10th, that'll be our night meeting, and then we'll have one on the 24th, that'll be our 9 a.m. meeting, both on Mondays. The next month, November, of course, that comes into the holidays, so as consistent with our bylaws, we only have the one meeting in November, which would be the second Monday, the 14th, and then we would also have only one meeting in December, which would be December the 12th. And those will both be night meetings on the second Monday. So those are the remaining meetings we have. I did want to alert you to the planning that we have going on right now of creating a training session. We're going to do a joint training for planning commissioners and Board of Zoning Appeal members. Probably going to be in November. We'll probably have send something out to you, kind of getting some ideas of some good time frames in November. We're going to have Nick make some presentations, probably ourselves, our engineering staff as well, kind of going over some topics that are going to be relevant for the things that we're going through. So I just wanted to alert you to that, just to kind of keep your eyes and ears open for some more information on that. Yes, it would be separate from that is what we're looking at. Now, it may end up being on the same day as something. Maybe we just do it right after lunch and then goes right into the night meeting. We'll see how it plays out, but yeah. Yes, that's correct. Yes, sir.
All right.
All right.
If that's all we have this morning, this meeting's adjourned.